Welcome to Let's Talk with John Kane and Regan DeLoggins. We are social distancing today. We've got Reggie in studio holding down the fort, almost single-handedly, I think. And Regan and I are joining by Skype. So, look, if we have any technical difficulty, we're still all working through it. So, but I'm optimistic. I'm going to count on Reggie when we do go to the phone lines. Reggie, you're going to introduce our callers. We'll do that in the second hour.
No problem.
But let's get into it. Obviously, we cannot do a show and not talk about COVID-19, the novel coronavirus. I'm hoping that Regan and I can offer something. Again, some native perspective, kind of what we're going through, but also we wanted to spend a little bit of time not just debunking conspiracy theories, but trying to, look, there's a lot of people who have different opinions about all this, where it's going, what it means, all of that stuff. And we, at some point we've got to make sure that some of us are reporting or at least purporting a grounded view of this. And so, there's a lot of, religion issues that are coming into this thing with people not being able to go to church. There are a lot of people who are recommending treatments to cure or, resist this. And look, we're not going to address all of that stuff, but we do want to at least offer some thoughts on this. So Regan, again, thank you. This is the first time that you're having to join us by phone.
Yeah, this is a bit odd. I hope that y'all can hear me okay.
You sound good. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, it's weird. It's weird to be doing this in my sweatpants, but here we are.
Well, I'm fully dressed in real clothing, but I have left my home. I am in my own studio, but you know what? It's this. Somebody. I was doing a Skype conference yesterday, and somebody described themselves doing it from their she shed. Well, this is kind of my he shed. It's my studio. It's not much bigger than a shed, but that's all it's got to be. So, and we are streaming. Live streaming the show via Facebook. Unfortunately, the rest of you can't see Reggie or Regan. You only have to see me, I guess. But maybe we'll actually sort some of that stuff. Maybe we'll do some Skype screening, I guess, and we'll get you guys on the monitor behind me. But for now, we'll take it one step at a time to make sure that we can at least get a show out there, even if it is somewhat audio and visually compromised. I think it's really important that we try to maintain a sense of normalcy in a very unnormal. And look, one of the comments that I reject or the phrases I reject completely is when I hear newscaster after newscaster after newscaster call this the new normal. This is not normal, folks, and nor should it be. So let's not pretend that something is being established here that once some of this crisis has ebbed, that we don't accept whatever compromises have happened to any of us in terms of freedoms, in terms of what we will allow the government to do or not do. So I just want to keep that out there.
I think it's really great that you bring that up. Well, first I want to say that my studio is my living room shared with 3 roommates, 2 cats, and a dog. So if you hear barking or meowing or anything like that, I apologize ahead of time. But then the second thing I wanted to say was I wanted to touch on what you just brought up, which is this idea of the new normal and also what it will look like post COVID-19, assuming that there is a post COVID-19, and how much panic and fear mongering is used to justify nationalism and egregious patriotism, because a lot of the things that I'm seeing out there are incredibly problematic. And I hope that if COVID-19 does anything for us, it reminds us that our normal was problematic, our panic is problematic, and I hope that our future can rectify a lot of the wrong. I don't want to go back to normal is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, the old normal wasn't so great.
Yeah, it wasn't so great. The new normal isn't great. The old normal isn't great.
Well, and I want to address something because, and we'll build upon this conversation, but I listen to a lot of Native people. I'm in touch with a lot of Native people, and and of course we put some memes up, and some of them are humorous, and there's no problem with humor as long as we're not, really being cruel about it. But some of the memes that I saw is we survived. We survived massacres. We survived smallpox. We survived residential schools, and we'll survive this. Let me be clear. We didn't survive those things in a great fashion. I mean, 95% of our population was wiped out by disease in several tranches, not just smallpox and influenza, but, the rape culture, some of the venereal diseases that our immune systems didn't protect us from that, nor did some, native version of a deity protect us from that. Look, some of us survived, but all of us didn't. And, and that goes with residential schools and all that stuff. So when I hear Native people say that, or when I hear Donald Trump say something like, we will be victorious and we will, we're going to have a great victory here and we're all going to be fine. No, we're not. We're not all going to be fine. And that's the reason that we should take some of this stuff seriously. We lost 95% of our population in previous pandemics that were, brought to our shores. And I'm not saying we're going to lose 95% here, but let's not make light of some of what history has taught us. And while we specifically can call ourselves survivors, we lost a lot of family. We lost a lot of people along the way. So, look, this isn't a tough man competition. I'm not going to say, oh yeah, well, we survived this, or I ride the subway so I can survive anything. No. Let's take this stuff seriously and let's do everything we can to survive. And you know what? Let's do everything we can so others survive. Yeah.
I think that this survival narrative that a lot of Indigenous people are participating in is it's fear rhetoric. A lot of people are fearful and therefore are using this like, oh, we've survived worse, therefore we can do this. And I understand, but also I think it's really, really quite horrible considering that there are so many people dying or just affected or inflicted or unsheltered. And so I find it to be a bit in poor taste. And as you said, we survived worse than this. I mean, have we? As you said, a lot of our population was destroyed, and there are things from our traditional teachings that we will never get back.
Yeah, we didn't just lose people. No. We lost significant parts of our culture. We lost significant parts of our lifestyles. So in all of those things, and I'm not just talking about influenza and smallpox. I mean, residential schools, removal. Let's not pretend we're not still bearing the cost of some of these things. And I think it's important that people remember that.
AIDS and HIV disproportionately affects Native folks and other people of color. And a lot of folks, we look at AIDS and HIV as something of, a pandemic of the past, but it is still, within our communities, it is still can be a death sentence for a lot of Indigenous folks. So I hate this. Like we can survive because we have survived. We are still carrying the genetic and emotional trauma from past actions of violence. So I think that I would urge Indigenous folks
and much of it continues. I mean, this isn't just something that we have in our DNA or in intergenerational trauma. I mean, and look, we can talk about missing and murdered Indigenous women. We can talk about all that stuff, but the lives that we're living today are markedly different than the lives we lived before. Certainly not because of civilization in any positive way. So I think it is important. Hey, look, the other thing I want to mention early on, and this conversation will go in various ways. There is a clear level of racism in medicine. And it could not be more evidenced than by the maternal mortality rate of childbirth. And that's one of the things that the media is starting to catch on with a little bit of this. But the disproportionate number, especially of black women, who die giving birth, for no other reason than racism. And there is no other reason. There's no genetic, there's no, there's no other reason why a black woman should be at a higher risk of giving birth. So, and a lot of that is attributed to the relationship between the patient and the doctor. Now, my concern is that this is going to rear its head in this crisis as well. And I'm sure it is rearing its head in this crisis. So when a person of color is complaining about a shortness of breath, or not being able to breathe. I know right now it is getting closer and closer to this place where decisions are being made on who gets to be hospitalized and who doesn't get to be hospitalized, who gets to be put on oxygen, who doesn't get put on oxygen, who gets a ventilator. And to be clear, because I don't know if people realize this fully, there's a big difference between getting an oxygen mask put on your face and being put on a ventilator. Being put on a ventilator means that you are put under. So you are not conscious, and you're intubated. You have a tube put down your throat, and you are not breathing on your own at this point. That you're actually the machine is making you breathe. Now, here's the other thing that isn't widely talked about is the survival rate of individuals who get put on ventilators in this crisis thus far is only playing at about 50%. So if your health has declined to the point that you are not just intubated in the hospital, you're not just having a supplemental oxygen, provided to you, but if you are intubated and put on a ventilator, your survival rate has dropped to about 50%. And so when I think about the race component of this thing, that really concerns me. And so I want to throw it out there. I know there's one or two callers, and we don't have to mention my name, that always get bent when I mention racism. But the statistics are clear in any way, regardless of this pandemic. But and again, mortality of mothers giving birth is one of the clear indicators of that. So I want to throw that out there. And when we do go to calls, if somebody has some of those experiences, one of the best ways to solve some of these crises is to shine a light on it. So I throw that out there. I don't know if you have thoughts on that as well, Regan.
I definitely do. I think that first, if anyone wants to placate white fragility, this is not the show for you. So I don't feel as though, folks who don't understand that racism exists, there are obviously people that have privilege within the world. In the same way that people who don't understand that misogyny exists or transphobia or homophobia, like these things exist with or without your understanding. So that's one thing I want to say. But I also know that there are, I will keep this person anonymous, but there is a person, an Indigenous person here in the city, and their Indigenous parent is a woman in the ICU, currently not for COVID-19, but they need bed space, and therefore we're trying to guilt trip the family into taking their family member out of the ICU, which is a death sentence for them, in order to make room for people with COVID-19. And they definitely approached the Indigenous woman first before they approached other members, asking them to take their family members off out of the intensive care unit to make room for people with COVID. So it is happening already, where we see specifically Indigenous women within the New York City hospital system being asked to put themselves into ridiculous and jeopardizing health situations in order to, under the guise of what is best for the larger population. So racism in medicine is definitely is a real thing. And if anybody is interested in reading more about it, there's a book called Medical Bondage, Race, Gender, and the Origins of American Gynecology. And it specifically talks about how the practice of gynecology came out of doctors testing, torturing, and mutilating Black women during the era of slavery and Reconstruction. So go read that book and then try to tell me there isn't racism within the medical industry.
Well, and there's plenty of examples of that. Obviously, there were sterilization programs that were occurring to Native women, unbeknownst to them oftentimes. Oftentimes, they were coerced into whether they would be able to keep their existing children if they would only be allowed to keep their existing children if they were, if they had hysterectomies so as to not to have more. These were the kinds of things that took place.
Yeah.
So there is definitely a relationship. There's the bad blood syphilis debacle that went on in the South. It went all the way up to the Nixon administration, where they were telling black men, they were actually allowing venereal disease, syphilis in particular, to spread untreated. They were just giving them the placebos and telling them that they were being encouraging them to get treatment just so they could monitor them. So no, there's a history of that, and
it is the Tuskegee Project, right?
Exactly. I'm sorry, I was drawing a blank there. Yeah. In fact, I actually. I used to be a mechanic in Houston back in the day, and I used to work on the guy's car who wrote the first book about that, called Bad Blood. It's probably worth checking out. That was the first book that was done on that subject. But little promotion.
When the CIA went into Guatemala in 1952 in order to overthrow our leader, in order to put in an authoritative government and begin a 35-year-long civil war, which specifically targeted indigenous communities, they did a syphilis test on Mayan women that, unbeknownst to them, obviously, they were contracted syphilis and were also told that they were being given medications to make it better. And in fact, it obviously, the U.S. government murdered hundreds of thousands of Mayan indigenous women that way, and greatly impacted my family, and is actually one of the reasons why we immigrated to the occupied United States. So there is a long history of racist medicine and medical practices that are still going on today, and I'm interested to see and horrified to see how COVID is also going to disproportionately affect people of color.
Well, and let me just, I know people are being barraged with numbers, but I think sometimes putting the numbers in perspective. Right now, China still has had the highest number of total cases of COVID-19. Right now, they have less than 4,000 active cases, at least confirmed by testing. Whether that's an accurate number because of the absence of testing, that's a debatable thing. But in terms of numbers that we can rely on, and these are all going to be confirmed by test numbers, China still sits at just above 81,000. But Italy's going to overtake China, if not by tonight, by tomorrow. They're sitting at just over 80,000. The United States is sitting at 79,000. By tomorrow, the United States will pass Italy and China for the total total number of confirmed cases. But here's the thing. The United States has already surpassed both of them. In fact, China, like I said, their active cases are down below 4,000. Italy has 62,000 active cases, confirmed active cases, confirmed by testing. The United States has 76,000. So the United States is already well beyond what Italy has. Now, the death rate is lower, and there's no question about that. But again, what people have to realize is the United States has only tested 1/10 of 1% of the population. Let me say it again. 1/10 of 1% of the population of the United States has been tested. And you know what? Many people will never be tested, symptomatic or asymptomatic. In fact, there will be many people who will have survived this pandemic and will never have been tested. There will be many people who will die because of this, who will never be tested. Because I guarantee anybody who died last month, the month of February, and that death was attributed to, let's say, the flu or any other type of pneumonia, they're not testing dead people, folks. So the numbers that we give are only numbers based on the tests that have been given. But based on that alone, the United States has surpassed every other nation, including Italy, by over 10,000 people for active cases. And of those active cases, and again, thus far, only less than 2,000 cases are considered where our people have to have been considered recovered. So while there's been 1,100 deaths, only 1,800 at this point, and whether it's because of time frame, I don't know how much they're retesting people. So to classify or characterize somebody as recovered, I assume that's more of a time issue than. I don't think they're testing and retesting to see if people have been recovered or not. But somebody else can fill me in on that. But I just want the numbers to be out there, and so people understand the scale of this thing in the United States. And again, of those numbers, New York is the disproportionate. I mean, New York represents 37,000 of those cases. New Jersey is second with almost 7,000 cases. California, although they're third on this thing, California is the most populated state in the United States. California, they've only tested 0.03% of the population. So California, as advanced as people like to think California is, they're not even any place close to have tested as many people as New York City has, let alone any place else. So
I would go ahead.
No, I'm sighing because even as I'm saying these numbers, I find it disturbing.
Well, what I wanted to urge people to do who are listening is to go to covidactnow.org. The reason I say that is because this website has the entirety of the occupied United States mapped out, and state by state, it provides what your state has done so far. Considering if it has done limited action against COVID, social distancing, or shelter in place. And then you have the ability to click on a state, like I'm going to click on Mississippi, my home state, and it provides a graph of what has happened thus far and what is projected to happen considering if there are no, let's look at Mississippi. Okay, Mississippi has limited action, which means that there has been little to no action, a state or government intervention on the peoples that live there, including just education of what COVID-19 is.
So, and to be clear, they're not shutting down the state. They haven't closed the schools. People aren't being told to shelter. So they've done very little to limit the interaction of people in the state of Mississippi.
Yep. So I'm looking at the state of Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Missouri, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, what's the next one? South Dakota and Idaho are all considered limited action, which means that public advocacy around quote unquote social distancing and advanced hygiene, minimal mandated restrictions are in these states. And then there's also, there's some that are shelter in place and some that are social distancing. But if you click, I'm looking at Mississippi because it interests me. And as of right now, there, 495 hospitalizations expected by March 31st. And then by April 28th, it's 63,296 expected hospitalizations if the state of Mississippi does nothing to protect the people that live there. So I would urge folks to look state by state. I think it's really interesting. It provides estimated cumulative people that'll be infected if no action is taken, or if there are 3 months of lockdown, 3 months of shelter in place, 3 months of social distancing. It's a really quite horrifying. And if anybody is not participating in social distancing or those kinds of things, you can see what the numbers could look like. And of course, I'm interested in how this affects Indigenous people, and it concerns me that Oklahoma has done very little to protect folks there.
Well, and we mentioned this on last week's show, but I think it's important that people realize that even though many territories, including the one that I'm speaking from right here in Cattaraugus, they have a decent clinic, we are doing no testing here. There are no test kits that have been made available to most native health centers, and we don't have nearby hospitals in many, for here, I mean, I live in Western New York. I can still go to Buffalo. It's only, 40-minute drive or whatever else. So it's not unreasonable. But when you talk about some of these native territories, especially out west and some of these more remote areas, the only health service they get is from their clinics. And if they're not being provided, with test equipment or any, other, life-saving treatment, it makes our people very, very, very vulnerable.
I do want to say that I want to give a shout out to the Lummi Nation, which is based in the Pacific Northwest. A great article came out on the 18th of March in The Guardian in relation to the work that they are doing. And this is the 18th of March, which if you consider the timeline of just, a week ago, so much has changed. And the Lummi Nation prepared for COVID since it first appeared in Wuhan, and took it upon themselves knowing that the federal government would provide, little to no support. And they actually are providing not just tests, but also they're open to any Indigenous person. They changed their their social center into a small hospital and medical center. They gathered medical supplies and test kits, and they got personnel protective equipment. Weeks before anything was even announced by the U.S. government. So they declared a state of emergency on March 3rd, which was 10 days before the president did the same for the U.S. So I think that there are some Indigenous nations who are and did see this as a threat and took some really great protocol. And if anyone is looking to mirror that kind of work before it gets too crazy, I would urge folks to check out the article and to look at the Lummi Nation. They have an entire website dedicated to it. They're really crushing it.
Well, and even, for any places that have, taken some of these serious action, unfortunately, even they were inhibited by the lack of information. And I'm not talking about from China. I'm talking about from the federal government. I mean, because even many of our health services depend on a lot of stuff flowing from Washington. So, one of my biggest concerns with all of this is that the actions taken, even in places like New York or New Rochelle, which seems to be, the most, they called the most draconian, I guess, is probably, too little and too late to do that major flattening of the curve issue that people are trying to talk. And I'm not saying don't do it, but I'm just saying if things had been done earlier, and I'm not saying that, the United States could mirror what an authoritarian government like China could do. I realize that that's almost impossible, especially because of the sense of entitlement that Americans have, towards, who can tell them what to do and when to do it, that kind of thing. That would have been very, very, very difficult. But this is, there's no evidence whatsoever at this point that there is any changing in the pace of spread. Even when, and Cuomo was saying this as well, don't be too alarmed by the spike because a lot of that spike is going to be due to our increased testing. Yes, that's true. It is, the numbers you're throwing up on these websites, and I use, by the way, Worldometer, which is a pretty good website for world data in general, but Worldometer, and then there's a coronavirus tab to that. But there's no evidence that testing is outpacing the spread of this. And especially, as you were just indicating, there are states that have done limited action to stem the tide of this thing. I mean, there was a big boast that West Virginia, for the longest time, had no cases. Well, that's no confirmed cases. And the reason they had no cases is because they weren't being provided any testing. Now, West Virginia is not even on the bottom of the list. They're moving right up, and because now they're getting testing. So there's a real concern. Even as I am, kind of obsessed with some of these numbers, I have to put them I have to put myself into a constant state of being wary of them. Not because the numbers are lying, but because the numbers by themselves, when it comes to results of testing, aren't going to tell the full story.
And I think that another way to kind of reflect this back into to Indian country is if you do look at the IHS website, which is the Indian Health Services website, and you go to their coronavirus COVID-19 page, they have a chart that was last updated on March 25th of the amount of tests for Indigenous folks by state or by city, the amount of people that were tested, the outcome of positive or negative. And if you look at just the amount of people tested in comparison of Indigenous communities to the amount of cases in these communities, it's an incredibly disproportionate number. It's like, let's just look at Albuquerque, for example. Albuquerque, New Mexico has a huge amount of Indigenous folks. 56 Indigenous people were tested, 1 tested positive, and 27 tested negative. So only 28 of those tests were useful in the first place. And then if we transpose the number tested to the amount of confirmed cases in Albuquerque, it's very, very different.
Right. Why don't we, Reggie, maybe cue up a little tune. We'll take a bit of a break, and we come back. I want to talk about, I'm going to talk about the stimulus package, because that's another place where we're going to see where resources are going to be limited when they go into native territory. But I also want to talk about some of the views that people have about about treatments for this stuff. I mean, whether they're homeopathic or, based on false data or whatever. I want to make sure that people, that some of the stuff can be put into its proper perspective. So we'll talk about that when we come back. We'll take a break. This is John Kane with Regan and John. This is Let's Talk, and we'll be back after. All right, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. I've got Regan and John via Skype. I'm via Skype, and we got Reggie in the studio. Hey, Reggie, are we doing a news break at the top of the hour?
Yes, we are.
All right, so we'll you can just. Don't be afraid to jump on us at about 5 till so we can...
oh, no, I'm not scared. I'm not scared.
Can't be anymore, right?
Not at this point.
All right, and then we are going to go to calls. Reg, I got another question, Reggie. Are we on a fund drive yet?
Well, not officially.
Okay, all right, because I listened to the previous show. So having said that, we're always in dire need. And look, during...
Yeah, that's... point. Yeah.
During times like this, it should be even more evident to people the value of of a station like WBAI. So you can always go to the fund, the pledge line. You can go to 516-620-3602. And look, I'm not pitching premiums. I'm just asking you to become a buddy of the show, become a buddy of the station. So sign up for the
premium.
Well, excuse me?
I said the station is the premium.
Yes, the station is a premium, and we hope that our show is one of those premiums. So
there you go.
So again, 516-620-3602. You can become a buddy by giving up your credit card information or your checking account information in a very, very secure manner, and then you can set the amount that you want to pay each month, whether it's 5, 10, 20, whatever it is. I think the average, somebody told me, was about $15. But but any amount is helpful. And if you do that and you list Let's Talk as the show that you're joining the buddy program in the name of, that sends a signal too. And I know many of you have. We're probably the highest active 1 day a week show in terms of bringing in WBI buddies. But look, I want to compete against the 5 day a week shows. I mean, I'm not satisfied with this. Let's get 60, 70, 80 buddies. Let's do it. So you can also go to the website, which is give2wbai.org. That's GIVE, the number 2, WBAI.org. And you can follow the prompts there. Look, you can give a one-time donation. You can, if you go to the website, you can follow the prompts to see how to donate by text. You can do all of that stuff. But WBAI is a valuable resource, and we are going through extreme measures to keep the station going. One of the Pacifica stations is doing a shutdown. Is that right, Reggie?
Yeah, I don't remember which one. I got
one of the California stations. I think. Yeah,
heard word of that.
So, I mean, this is not an easy thing to get through. I mean, we are at risk. And in fact, we've had some compromise, a compromise situation at WBAI. So right now we're limiting it. I think Reggie is chained to a pole there. So he's the only one who,
yeah, pretty much. He and
Poor Reggie.
3 other people, yeah.
And there's snipers on the building, keep making sure that nobody else comes close. And of course, I'm exaggerating.
Really,
I
not.
gotta say that. Okay.
Oh.
So anyway, but yeah, so support the station, support the show. Again, the pledge line's 516-620-3602. We are going to take your phone calls. If you want that number, I'll give it now. It's 212-209-2877. That's a number to call for you to join the show. And look, I understand in times like this, sometimes people just need to be heard. So whether you address something that Regan and I have brought up or not, look, we're here. Let's talk, right? So let's talk. Regan, I did want to mention the stimulus package because there are some. Look, I'm not signing up for any Trump checks, and that's just me. And I would be hypocritical if I did. It ain't happening. But I know that there may be businesses, native businesses, that are going to be challenged to approach this thing. But I also know when people talk about these low unemployment rates, we don't even register on those unemployment numbers because we've had people, we have unemployment rates that you can't be measured in the same way they measure the national unemployment rate. The national unemployment rate is only calculated over the last 60 days, people who have registered for unemployment. So if you've been out of work since 2008, or whenever, you're not even counted as the unemployed. And on native territories, the unemployment rate is very, very high. Not to mention the fact that our economies are different. Many of our economies are cash based. We aren't necessarily in the U.S. system, even though we rely on the U.S. commerce to some extent. I mean, we have businesses that rely on patronage from outside of our territories. We hire people that from off our territories. We are part of the U.S. or Canadian economies, but we don't operate the same way. And I know that there are a lot of Native people who didn't file taxes last year or the year before, so they're not going to be a part of this thing. So when people look at this stimulus package, I think they're going to find out that this has been a huge gift to the wealthy, and some token stuff, some crumbs that drop off the table to everybody else.
I think also it's important to note that even though there are stimulus packages, it doesn't mean that folks are going to, apply for them. I mean, you and I are different in the sense that we won't because I don't need government money. I don't consider myself under government control. So I don't need that money.
Or assistance.
Or assistance. I don't need any of that, especially not from this administration.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that, for example, landlords here in New York have the ability to go to their banks and have their mortgages waived for the months of April and May. And a lot of landlords, particularly slumlords, will not be doing that, or they will and still will be requiring us to pay rent in order to make a profit, which I think is absurd. So rather than having people, landlords reach out to their banks, it should just be a forced. We just shouldn't have to pay rent, is what I'm saying. I live in a home with 4 people, and 3 of us are unemployed because of COVID-19. And I'm not quite sure how rent is supposed to be paid for folks who have lost their jobs, especially if they're undocumented people or people that rely on cash and haven't been able to make that money as they usually would. So if you are planning on paying rent, I would urge you to join the strike to not pay rent, and to also make sure you contact your slumlords so that they do apply for these stimulus packages, so that you're not spending money that you don't have.
The other thing I find interesting with this stimulus package, as much as it does for Wall Street, and you can see the numbers are climbing up. I mean, as much as it does for big wealthy corporations, there doesn't seem to be anything in there to assist state budgets that are going to find themselves in a world of hurt. I mean, you have to understand that there are some states that do income tax, and like New York, and they're going to push their filing deadline back like the federal government has. But there's also going to be a lot less income. A lot of states rely on sales tax. So sales tax, look, all these runs at grocery stores, there's no sales tax on groceries, most grocery items. So there is no state revenue coming from those sales. So when people say, "Oh yeah, those stores are all doing fine," well, they are doing okay from a grocery standpoint, but food isn't their big ticket items, so nobody is doing well here. And I will applaud those people who are making sure that the food supply, does stay intact. And you can't downplay the significance of everybody from the folks picking food in the fields to the folks driving it with the trucks and the people putting it on the shelves. I mean, it is warranted that those people be applauded for their efforts. I mean, and of course, it's also great that they still have jobs. But I'm worried. Well, and let me finish this last thought.
Yeah, no, go for it.
I'm worried that the tensions that exist between governors, especially Democratic governors, and this president, that is going to turn into a big issue. And there's a lot of people who are praising Cuomo. I have my own thoughts about Andrew Cuomo on a bunch of other levels, and even some of this. But there are a lot of people praising him and condemning Trump, and that doesn't bode well for the relationship between Trump and Cuomo. So when you have states like New York and eventually California, because California is going to catch up. Trust me, California is going to pass New Jersey at some point. And so when you have two very, very populated Democratic, party supporting states like California and New York, I just worry about when politics starts to come into policy.
I mean, I agree completely, and I think that we can only see what happens next. I feel like a lot of our reactions are like, we'll see what happens within the next couple days, because everything is changing so quickly that there's no way to keep up with these things.
Yeah.
As much as we'd like to. I definitely do want to bring up, before we hit the top of the hour and take callers, I definitely do want to talk about the outbreak of COVID-19 within Indigenous communities, and specifically how disproportionately it has affected the Navajo and Apache counties. And Navajo Nation has been really drastically altered, with over 63 cases at this point, a lot of which were linked to a church rally. If you look at the the Independent put out an article on March 24th, 2020, and was updated March 25th, talking about this the COVID outbreak and the COVID outbreak in Navajo Nation and its link to the church rally. And you and I had been speaking about this yesterday, so I figured it was time to do it.
Well, and I am concerned about those who seem to struggle with this idea that their religious beliefs, their faith-based belief systems, have to trump common sense. And I'm using the word Trump in the right context here. I mean, there's there is no need for group worship. And in fact, most cultures don't even really have built in a system requiring group worship. But it has become, part of the culture, right? And it's how these religions have advanced themselves en masse, is by doing these things with large groups. I mean, Trump himself is saying he hopes he can, pull the stops out of everything so the churches can be packed for Easter. I guarantee if churches are packed for Easter, we're going to see, a huge uptick. But so it really does concern me. Now, the other place that concerns me is that because of the effects of assimilation, many native territories have treated their culture within a religious context. And back home here, for instance, this is the time of year where the maple festivals are done. And, some people call them ceremonies. And this is where we give thanks to the season that brings, that has the sap flowing, and we make maple sugar, and we use the sap as, for medicinal purposes, all that stuff. So this is the time of year that we do our social gathering, our cultural gathering, and we do some of the standard things we do with all of our Thanksgivings, and we give thanks. Now, who are we giving thanks to? And this gets to one of these. In our cultures, most Native cultures, we are not giving thanks to some supreme being, some all-powerful, all-knowing creator of all things. We have creation stories where we may even signify or personalize the power of creation. But those are our stories. We don't have the same thing as a God. Some cultures may, some Native cultures may, but I'm speaking from a Haudenosaunee standpoint. So when people say we need to do the ceremonies to give thanks to the Creator, I'm sorry, that's simply not the reason we do ceremonies. And maybe it is the reason that some people do it now because of Christian influence. But there is no requirement. If we don't do the maple ceremony, the Creator is not going to punish us. Yeah, what's going to happen is we're going to spread the disease. In fact, midwinters back here in Cattaraugus, a bunch of people came down with the flu immediately after midwinters because it got spread within the longhouse. So there has to be some common sense. And I try to always raise this issue that Native culture is not a religion. And our ceremonies and people always say, oh, well, make sure that you do ceremony. We say ceremony as if it's a verb to do ceremony. And by framing it that way and using that vernacular, we are recharacterizing what the things that we do in terms of giving thanks, and that we're giving thanks to each other, and we're acknowledging creation. I mean, when the last show that I did, I wanted to put something up for my podcast, like an image, and all I kept finding all over the internet was worship the Creator, not the creation. And I'm thinking, really, that's the antithesis of what the Native culture is about. Worship the Creator, not the creation. I didn't even know that was a thing, but apparently that is a very commonly held view among Christians.
And among Christian natives as well.
Exactly.
I think that so I've been reading a lot of articles in order to prep for the show, about Indigenous nations and people's reactions to COVID, how it's affecting our communities. And I also like to read the comments in a lot of these articles to see how, assuming Indigenous folks are responding. And the amount of people who are like, we just need to do a sweat lodge. Let's do a sweat. Time to do a sweat lodge is concerning.
And let's talk about that.
I mean, and I understand the benefits of a sweat. Like, I understand, it is definitely it can be spiritual for some people. It can be physical for some people. It can be physical and spiritual for some people. I understand.
And it's social. And it's social because you do it in a group. Right. But here's the thing.
But it's the part of people are looking to do sweats at this time, knowing that they could be putting more people at risk.
Yeah, but here's the reason.
You want to do sweat, do it by yourself.
Here's the reason it's being promoted that way, and because it's not just sweats. People are talking about this thing with big dry saunas and all kinds of other stuff.
Yeah.
The myth is that the virus is killed when it hits when exposed to a temperature of 136 degrees. I don't even know if that's true, but even if it is true, if you go into a sweat lodge or a sauna, you may expose the outer layer of your skin to 136 degrees. You may even look. I've been in some really, really hot sweat lodges, but you know what?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure my internal body temperature never got above 136. You know why I'm pretty sure of it? Because I walked out of it. It would kill you if your entire internal body temperature were to reach 136 degrees. For one thing, you would die before you reach that. I mean, if you did, only because of, ambient temperature, penetrating radiant temperature going through your body. The body cannot function at 136 degrees internal temperature. So,
hey guys,
yes.
I'm so sorry to break into this, but we're about to go into this news break right now. We have 3 callers on the line, so callers, stay on the line. We'll get to you on the other side of the hour. Once again, this is WBAI New York 99.5 FM. You're listening to Let's Talk with John and Regan, and we're about to go into this news break, and we'll see everyone on the other side.
All right. Thanks for coming back. This is Let's Talk with Regan and John. We are operating in a new reality, which has Regan and I both joining Reggie via Skype. Reggie's in studio, and we are a more than a safe distance away. So we'll continue the show. I know I've got a couple of callers lined up. I want to remind people to always, as always, support WBAI by going to the pledge line, 516-620-3602. That's the number to call to make a donation. The number to call to join Regan and I, which we will do calls throughout this next hour, is 212-209-2877. I did want to finish up on our thought, and I know Reggie we had a time stop, so we had to get to the news break.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Oh no problem. But
totally fine.
Back on the sweat lodge thing. You can kill the virus on your skin with a shower. You can wipe yourself down with a Clorox wipe if you want. But if you want to do it by subjecting your body to a 200-degree temperature or whatever else, it's not the most efficient way to do it. But just like when you take a shower, do the sweat lodge by yourself too. Don't shower with a friend and don't sweat lodge with a friend. I mean, in later times, by all means, but because you're still. Here's the thing about also doing a sweat lodge, folks. You breathe heavy in those hot temperatures, which is even now, and you're creating, whether it's a dry sauna or a sweat lodge, ends up being vapor in there. So now you're even providing water droplets for the virus to travel on. It's just a bad idea. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention on that note, look, Native people have been among the most skeptical group of people when this whole thing started. And I know there's a whole lot of Native people who view everything that comes out of the government as somehow false flag. And I think it's reasonable for Native people to be more suspicious, or people of color in general to be more suspicious than the rest of the population. But this is a pathogen, and I know I have a few people that are saying, no, this is all about our immunity. It's less about a pathogen. It's more about immunity. Because this pathogen is new, there's nobody who already has an immunity to COVID-19. There's nobody. I mean, I'm not saying your body can't fight it off, and some people will fight it off right at the gate. That doesn't mean they already had an immunity. It means they have a strong enough immune system to do so, which is part of the reason that kids are probably doing so well under these circumstances. But this is a new virus. Nobody has an existing immunity to this virus. And, so I just want to be clear that we don't get caught up into some of the rhetoric. And by all means, remain critical in your thinking. And remain skeptical, and make sure that whatever you see the government doing that seems over the top, if you will, that you remember this and that you don't let it continue after this thing subsides. I just like Regan said at the top of the show, the old normal wasn't great. The new normal, whatever that may be, and this isn't it. But we have to be very, very careful. So I just wanted to do that. I don't know if you had any final thoughts on the sweat lodge or any other cures that perhaps people are promoting in Native territories.
I think that all I want to say is that don't let fear mongering and panic lead to supporting authoritative government action.
Right. There you go.
That we still are autonomous, sovereign people, as I say, as an Indigenous person, and I also advocate for other people of color, and even settlers, to understand that, we don't need egregious patriotism or nationalism to cloud any judgment and to lead to continued authoritative measures put upon us by the federal government. So be critical, but also don't be stupid.
Yeah, we do have to compromise.
Sweat lodge.
We do have to compromise our activities, in not because we need to yield our freedom to the government, but we have to yield it to common sense. So let's just keep that in mind. I mean, look, and I say this, and I'm not saying this is to be boastful or anything else, but I decided that my trips to New York no longer were justifiable in the first week of March, before anybody was shutting anything down. Actually, I take it back. One of the things that tipped me off was the event that you were supposed to go to, Regan. When they canceled South by Southwest, I said, wait a second. This is way more serious, because the city of Austin Austin, Texas wasn't going to give up tens of millions of dollars in revenue that they were going to get. The organizers for South by Southwest weren't going to place themselves in quite possibly, a killing, scenario where they may be so financially stressed that it may be a real challenge for them to do it next year. So I realized that moment that we were at a new place, and for me to ride 8 hours on a train, a couple hours on a subway, and another 8 hours on a bus, was wise on my part. It wasn't until a week, well over a week later. Keep in mind, folks, we haven't completed 2 weeks of this. This is only 1 week was Monday, and we're only Thursday. Yeah. So we're only we're not very far into this thing. So, I've got to condemn anybody who thinks that their religious beliefs should trump sanity. Do not participate in. I know Trump and sanity in the same sentence don't make sense. I realize that, but group worship does not make any sense, folks. It just doesn't. And if you can't do it by Skype, then then just tell people about it later on the phone or whatever else. I don't know. All right.
I know that there are plenty of. Oh, let's jump to callers.
Yeah. Reggie, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to have you introduce the callers, because you can see that they're there. Regan and I cannot. So if you would introduce the callers, and then we'll take it from there. And Reggie, by all means, feel free to join in any place along here. You're part of this You're part of this crew at this point.
No, I appreciate that. But we do have a caller on the line. She's been very patient. And here we go. You're on the air with Let's Talk with John Kane and Regan DeLoggins. Hi there.
Hello.
Hey, thanks for joining the show.
Thank you. Thank you for your show. Can you briefly repeat the websites your guest had mentioned where we can track what each state is doing regarding the virus? Plus,
yes.
The indigenous people's website. Thank you.
So it is covidactnow.org. So that's COVIDACTNOW.org. And then when it comes to the indigenous reaction, or action rather, it's ihs.gov/coronavirus.
And the other site that I was giving, which has a constant flow of data, both globally and domestically, is it's called Worldometer, all one word, worldometer.com, and you can go to the coronavirus. Just to give an idea how fast these numbers are moving, we just heard the news at numbers at the top of the hour, and right now the United States has gone over 80,000 in terms of coronavirus cases. New York State is at 37,258. They've got over 4,000 new cases, and in New York alone. So that's how quickly the numbers are changing. So, but yeah, thanks for calling. Did you have any other comment other than asking about the website?
The caller is gone.
Okay.
But we do have another caller who has been waiting for a while. Hello, you're on the air with Let's Talk with John and Regan. It is your time.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey.
Sorry. hope everybody's safe out there, please.
Well, if you're hearing us, we're pretty safe, I guess.
For now.
This is pretty unprecedented for America. We haven't been through a pandemic like this. And it gets me thinking about history. It gets me, it gets me thinking like 600, 700 years ago when the Europeans first came here, how drastic that was to Native Americans who didn't have that immunity of the diseases in Europe, and how smallpox really wiped out a large percentage of them. But anyway, I was talking to somebody on BAI. A lot of us, we get our information from these people who are not really qualified, like Louis Farrakhan and stuff. I remember years ago he did a talk about General Amherst gave the smallpox blankets to the Indians, and he brought out that smallpox not be transmitted with blankets. I was wondering if anybody heard about that.
No, I don't.
If we'd heard about smallpox being transmitted through blankets?
Yeah, well, the story goes as General Amherst was a general, a Civil War general. a revolutionary.
I mean, it's not a story; it's a history. Blankets were used to pass smallpox to indigenous populations, not just in the United States, but also in Central and South America.
Yeah, so the idea that smallpox couldn't be transmitted through blankets, I don't. Just because Farrakhan said it doesn't necessarily make it true. And the reason we know about Lord Jeffrey Amherst, and it was actually well before the Revolutionary War. This had to do with depopulating, the New World, as they put it. Lord Jeffrey Amherst suggested it. He wrote it by his own hand, in his own handwriting, that they would be wise to distribute these infected blankets and then let God, have His way with them. Basically, that was kind of the gist of the letter. That way, they could say it was God's plan, even though it was being perpetuated with these blankets. Now, the other thing I want to mention is it isn't just smallpox. I oftentimes talk about two other diseases that there was a significant role that policy played in, and one of them is with the rape culture of Europe. Sexually transmitted diseases wiped out entire populations of Native people, from not only from our shores in South America, the Caribbean, but Hawaii. There was the idea that these guys, the first thing that they did was come off the boats and rape people, was not an unusual. And in fact, their captains wrote of this stuff. And, Captain Cook, when he came upon the islands of Hawaii, wrote in his journal the concern that he had about his men infecting the women. So there was that. Now the other one I want to mention is the spread of tuberculosis in particular, especially in the residential schools. In the Canadian press, they actually wrote that the mortality rate at residential schools was over 50% because of the unchecked and unregulated transmission of tuberculosis amongst Native kids. So I just want to mention those three, but and I get your point. There are a lot of people who are going to talk about as if they're experts on various pieces of information, and we all have to use a certain level of critical thinking and check. And I advise anybody to verify anything that Regan or I certainly say on the program. And look, maybe take a clue from us or a cue from us, perhaps, but do your own research.
Okay, that call is left, and we have another caller on the line. You're on the air with John and Regan. Hello.
Hey, John. Hey, Regan.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for calling.
Hey there.
Good, great. Hi, this is Jeff from Union County, New Jersey.
Hey, Jeff. Good to hear from you.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah, good talking to you. Anyway, I got to say, number one, I think, speaking to you, and I guess you're not a person to be intimidated easily. I mean, you pick a co-host that's punching way above her weight class, and obviously you wouldn't have done that.
I thought you were talking about her picking me. Damn.
Either way, you didn't have to go to the program either. I mean, it was your show. But anyway, I think she deserves her own show. Not to say she couldn't stay with yours as a co-host as well.
Between you and me, Reggie, did I say this already to you? Reggie, are you there?
I'm sorry. What was that?
Didn't Jeff just said that Regan should host her own show? Didn't I suggest that to you almost day one?
Oh no,
I'm waiting.
Regan can handle it. She can handle it. I see how. I mean, on the first day, she was like, "No, I got this. And so, and just the event that we had that happened last month, and how she was just handling the documentary about evasion, and just how she was just handling on her own. I just saw at points. I was,
yeah.
You got it.
I have to say that I'm going to give a shout out. I have to thank my father, who is definitely listening. He had a radio show back in the day and has given me some great tips. And so I think that has a lot to do with him.
Well,
but also I'm pretty cool too.
We stand on the shoulders of others. There's no question about it.
Anyway, I just want to see. I'm waiting for the day that she gets one of your knucklehead callers to call up, and when she's at the controls and starts talking about how everything will be a whole lot better with a healthy dose of capitalism.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
that caller.
we ran a little bit of interference on her first experience with some of those callers, but yeah, I remember Reggie and I remember specifically the day that Shawnee just like busted out of her chair, and I'm hoping I can at least be there to restrain Regan when that happens.
Oh no need for restraint.
No, the moment when Regan will say, "You know what, I got this," I'm like going to step back. I'm just going to sit down, eat my popcorn, and just going to say, "Ooh, there's going to be a show." I
just folded my shoulders, my arms, and I sat back when Shawnee did it. So I know that Regan's, yeah. No, Jeff, you're absolutely right. I am very happy that Regan decided to join me here. It's look, this is not the easiest thing to do. I mean, it may seem easy and it may seem effortless, but to maintain these kinds of conversations and to I'll admit that I don't prepare as much as Regan does, but part of it is because I live this life every single day. And I live in a Native community, so I'm always exposed to some of this stuff. So I don't, but I'll tell you, Regan does some great research, and she's very, very prepared, and I couldn't be happier with what we got going. And again, I've got to thank Shawnee Rice so much for being not only being my first co-host, but for also connecting us up here. So by the way, I did talk to Shawnee. She is she's back home in Watertown. She decided that New York was a little bit too hot for her, so she is home. By the way, in case you're wondering, she's alive and well and back home with her folks.
Good.
Oh, while I got you, what I would like to say, I missed the first 5 minutes of your show, but I did get the general gist. And as far as the new normal, I think that's the narrative that's pushed. And like you had said, I mean, if you remember after 9/11 when they did all that Homeland Security nonsense, none of that stuff went away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Patriot Act. Yep.
It just
still
became
there.
Ingrained. It just became ingrained.
Nonsense going away anytime soon.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's here's an example of something that occurred, and we can all have different opinions about this. When Washington State first started seeing had their first case, there was they had a program where they had a whole bunch of test kits from the flu that one of the hospitals had done. So they had a lot of samples of samples drawn from flu victims. The doctor who was ahead of this study and this program in particular tried to get permission to run COVID tests on those samples, because when you do a study and you chart out a specific thing that you've gotten people to give you a sample for, you are supposedly prohibited from using those samples for other purposes. Hospitals have been notorious, and the universities have been notorious for violating people's rights when it comes to this. But in this case, That's what this doctor was asking for authorization to do, and the federal government never gave it to them, so they probably missed an opportunity. Having said that, if they had been given that opportunity, in considering the dire circumstance, or what turns out to be dire, even if people didn't know it at the time, this is another example where if you sacrifice a specific safeguard in the interest of a greater good or an emergency situation like that, it's important that we realize that the sacrifice of that safeguard should not necessarily be a permanent elimination. And in this situation, it didn't get compromised, and we can argue about whether it should have or shouldn't have. But the reason those safeguards are in place is because I know Native people, we have been studied, and people have drawn, all kinds of blood and saliva and all kinds of samples from our people over the years, and have used it without our permission. And that, so I know the problems I know why the safeguard exists, put it that way.
I think the caller has left, and we have another caller on the line. You want to take it?
Yeah, first let me give the number out once again.
Yes.
The number is 212-209-2877. That's the number to call if you want to be a part of the show. We're probably going to take a break at the bottom of the hour, and then we'll bug out of here about 5 till. So we got plenty of time for callers. So by all means, if you have a thought that you want to share with us, you want to weigh in on something that Regan and I have said, or if you just have a New York experience. Frank, I take it back. We're international here. This show, streams live on WBAI.org. We stream live on Facebook. So if my friends from the Dakotas want to call in, or from Florida or anybody else, by all means, give us your experience and let us know. My friends from Langhorne, Pennsylvania, whoever wants to join us, by all means, feel free to do so. Again, 212-209-2877. All right, Reggie, go ahead. Caller, you're up next. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Me?
Yeah, you're
That's
up.
you.
Okay, I'm Sharif, and I'm calling from New York.
Hey, Sharif, thanks for calling.
I wish you all well and good health. Let me say this real quick because I want other people to be involved. If you go back and listen to Bonnie Faulkner, Guns and Butter, 3/18/2020.
Oh, that show.
Talks about, they had war games in Wuhan back in the fall. They had military from 100 nations. They had hundreds of Americans there. And they came to the conclusion that the Americans dropped that virus in the seafood market there. And if you think I'm not telling you the truth, go listen back to Bonnie Faulkner, 3/18/2020, and she'll explain it all with Michelle Zawindowski. Please go, it's right on WBI. Go into the archives and get it. They explain the whole thing. Thank you.
All right. Again, I know, I've heard stories like this. I didn't see listen to the program with Guns and Butter. Look, I some of these conspiracies are problematic, and I'm not saying that conspiracies aren't true. I love a good conspiracy theorist. Somebody who's done research. Because not only do they sometimes absolutely expose some unknown truths, but they also help frame this idea of critical thinking. So, but here's what I'll say about this. I mean, at this point, I am very, very much troubled by somebody like Donald Trump, who wants to try to assign blame to this by repeatedly calling it the Chinese virus. Especially when you think about something like the Spanish flu, which originated in Kansas and was spread to Europe by American soldiers. And only warranted the name the Spanish flu because Spain was a neutral player in that, and they were very much victimized by this virus, and they could speak freely because they weren't involved in the war itself. So I mean, look, wherever this thing comes from, and I've said this on the show already, I do attribute it to some extent to man's activity, intentional or otherwise.
Yeah.
I don't know how valid anybody's claim that the United States dropped this virus on a market is. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's I have my own doubts to that, but I will say that because of man's activity, we have taken diseases to a whole nother level. Cancer has been around forever, but we certainly gave it legs with nuclear activity, with the foods that we eat, with polluting the air and the water and the land. I think there's a lot of things that we have done to, frankly, encourage disease. And I think for the most part, disease is a natural response to an imbalance caused either by man or anybody else. It could be caused by, a run of some other, some other natural process or whatever else. Disease are part of the balance. They are part of what maintains harmony in a constantly moving, dynamic, and evolving nature. So I'll leave it there. But I appreciate the call.
I do want to say that we need to be careful about the narrative of this idea of and I'm not saying this is what you're saying, John, or what the caller is saying, but it's just on my mind, that we need to stop celebrating or advocating for the coronavirus as some sort of blessing.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Because pollution has gone down or because quarantines have happened, therefore Mother Earth is healing. It's inherently the rhetoric of eco-fascism if we are going to be using the coronavirus as a means of, it will kill the weak, but it's okay because it's helping the climate. And if you are on Twitter or Instagram, Jamie Margolin, which is at Jamie, JAMIE _Margolin, MARGOLIN, put a great series of Twitter threads together in which she is discussing this, because I think that, fear does a lot to our brains. And one of the things is that a lot of people are using it to, using the coronavirus to justify these deaths as a means of the earth is cleaning itself. So I would just advocate that folks go read that because we need to be careful about the rhetoric that is spreading. People are dying.
And I want to be clear. I'm not regarding this as some sort of, blessing, divine intervention, or Mother Earth healing herself. No, there is a natural process that terrible things like this happen. I mean, because of an imbalance, and whether it's man is responsible for it or not, and look, this is not karma. I said this before. This isn't karma. This is not payback. But this is something that that we all have to face, and many very good and very innocent people will suffer because of this, and not just because of the of the virus itself, but because of the reaction. I mean, I'm not going to get into the economic stuff. I mean, I think if there's one positive thing that comes out of this thing, it's it kind of puts capitalism in its place. But trust me, there are people who are going to do, they're going to violate everything that they believe in is true about socialism just to advance their capitalism afterwards anyway. But anyway, I do agree with you, and I want to make sure that people understand that even though I think that when diseases develop as a response to an imbalance, it is not, it's not nature's payback. I mean, there's bad things that exist in nature too. I mean, if you want to put it in that good and evil construct, but there are things that are not good for you or I, but that have other benefits to perhaps even other species. But no, this is not a good thing by any means.
Absolutely.
All right. Yeah. What do you think? We're going to take a break here, and then we'll get a good run of callers after the break.
Yeah, that sounds good. Let's take a quick break then.
All right. So let me give the number out one more time. It's 212-209-2877. So if you want to write that number down and give us a call during the break, Reggie will put you on the stack, as we say. 212-209-2877, and then we'll run the callers out through the rest of the program. This is John Kane with Regan and John, and we'll be right back after this. All right, thanks for coming back. Hey, that's Reggie, you picked a good song. This is,
it just happens.
Well, and look, during the other break, you played Someday I'll Never Learn, which was also a good reminder to people to take something from this.
Wrong.
He does. Well, that's Murray Porter doing a song called "Don't Let Go," and it's really his song dedicated to victims of suicide and that kind of thing. I think it's important. One of the things I was listening to was a doctor, I was reading a Twitter feed from a doctor who was saying, as he's treating all of these COVID-19 patients, he's saying, where are all the heart attacks? Where are all the other emergencies? Because he wasn't seeing any of those. It's important that people realize that while this is happening, all the other stuff is happening too. And in many ways, this pandemic is exacerbating, and look, and I'm never one to quote or to cite some, any piece of wisdom from Donald Trump, because it was anything but he tried to suggest that if they keep, the economy shut down, that there's going to be a rash of suicides, as if the economy is the problem. I mean, or this just current economy. Look, there's already been an incredible increase in suicide of farmers because of, some of Trump's policies with trade and that kind of thing. But I think it's important that people understand that there's hardships that are happening with and in spite of what's going on right now. And it's important, even with social distancing, that we maintain relationships and conversations. I've called, people that I probably owed calls to anyway, but I made sure I made some calls, especially to some of the older folks that I know, just to make sure everybody's doing okay. Reach out and not just because you're worried about their health, but perhaps even their mental health. Sometimes people just need to be touched in ways that a phone call can even do. So don't let go is a good song. So thank you for playing that.
And I will say just quickly, if anybody is Indigenous who's listening and is looking to make some connections, if you go to on Instagram at @native_pen pal project, you can join a number of other folks who we're all Indigenous, and we all just write letters to each other and send care packages and small things like that. So if you're looking to connect with other folks that are Indigenous during this time and feel a bit isolated, it's at @native_pen pal project.
All right. Thanks for that. All right. Okay. Again, the number to call here is 212-209-2877. That's the number to call to be a part of the show. So if you'd like to join Regan and I for a bit more conversation, or offer your thoughts to the listening public, by all means, give us a call. Reggie, we got anybody lined up yet?
We got 4 callers ready.
All right. Let's do it.
Let's go.
Here we go. We are on the air with John and Regan. Your next caller.
Thank you. First of all, thank you. I enjoyed the program. I'm enjoying the program. I have to agree with you. So I don't know what is going on exactly, whether it's been planned or whether it's a combination of circumstance and plan and that sort of thing. But the one thing that I have come to understand quite a while back, we live in an environment where there is great intellectual, spiritual. We have many doctors. We have great wealth in our environment. And where the virus is hitting most aggressively in New York City and state, the wealth is phenomenal. I really would like to see us overcome this extremely challenging situation as we have done many others. John, you're a brother, and this sister's on the line. You're from the Indigenous American Indian group. Certain sectors of the environment didn't expect you to survive at all. I am part of the African American group. I was not expected to survive either. One thing that we have learned, that prayer is extremely powerful, and prayer in combination with action is unbeatable. We have the wealth, we have the wisdom, we have the medical expertise in our immediate environment, and it is time for us to utilize what we have used for generations in order to survive, to do so now. We must utilize prayer, whatever religious teaching you follow. Start to maximize in practicing that. Take action. Don't sit on your hands. What comes to mind, take action and actually follow what your heart dictates to do exactly as it comes forward after prayer. And let's start to pull the wealth in our environment to utilize it so that we can overcome the situation. There's a saying, I'm not quite sure because I'm not a religious, I don't practice Christianity, I'm a Buddhist, but things don't happen to a person who doesn't have the ability to resolve the situation. In my teaching, through great obstacles comes great benefit. So let's get busy. Thanks so much.
I appreciate the call, but I will say that some people do get faced with obstacles that they are unable to bear, and I don't think that these obstacles like this are targeted either mystically, spiritually, or otherwise. I know there are people who rely very strongly on prayer. I'm not one of them. I think most of the benefits that we have within our cultures have to do with how we express and how we share that with others, especially those within your group. And I'm not talking about group worship here. I'm talking about how we utilize the things that generations before us have advanced and provided to us as not just survival mechanisms, but how we continue to build and grow in spite of whatever calamities befall us. I mean, when I hear, as I said earlier in the show, people say, well, we survived this, we survived that. Yeah, we can say that, but many didn't. But those of us who do survive whatever calamity befalls us, whether it's a pandemic or whether it's a natural disaster or whatever else, we do hope that each time we have something like this, war, pestilence, whatever, each time we come through this, that we add to our knowledge base and we make sure that we share the burden to satisfy the needs, and I think that's very important. But thank you very much for that call. I appreciate the caller.
I also want to say something related to survival. I think as people of color, I'm thinking specifically of Indigenous folks and Black folks, and I do want to echo what was said by the caller, which is that we were not intended to survive. And so it is wonderful to see us survive. But I also want to push back on that and say that I'm tired of surviving and I'm ready to thrive. When will people of color, Indigenous and Black communities, have the ability or take the ability upon ourselves to break away from assimilationist tactics, so break away from capitalism, and really thrive in a way that we have never been able to under a capitalist system? So, I think that, and I am a person that does pray, and I have my own spirituality that I find to be important. And I do believe that there is some sense of strength that comes in when I do pray, just a connection to earth that I don't usually have. But in no way do I feel that it has, it only provides me internal strength. It does not heal me, is what I want to say. So I do want to start to push the rhetoric away from we need to survive to the point of we need to thrive. And what does it look like to thrive?
Well, and on that note, I mean, when and with the caller who says we weren't intended to survive, to take that a little farther, the systems that exist right now, if they aren't intended to eliminate us, they are certainly intended to keep us in the place that we're at, and to to keep us marginalized, to keep us impoverished, and look, there's no greater evidence of that by what you see in what was created in the reservation system. The whole idea that you could, herd people into these communities, these unnatural environments, and then strip away any means for not just sustenance, but again, the ability to thrive. And then you characterize the population after that. You create a situation where people have a huge disadvantage, and then try to characterize the people as somehow less than you because they don't overcome a disadvantage that other people have never even imagined that they could face. So I just wanted to add to your thoughts and to the thoughts of the caller.
Absolutely. Well, let's hop on to the next caller. I think we have quite a few waiting.
Okay, here we next caller. You're up with Let's Talk with John and Regan. Tell us your name and where you're calling from.
Yes, I'm calling from New York, but actually I am an Amazon. I am an indigenous from Ecuador.
Well, thank you for calling us.
My issue, because we have not no long time, is, I wanted to start with this political guy, who I don't know if he's a senator, an old man who say the old people needs to die to save the economy, in quote. So I wanted to let everybody know, people who are only concentrated in working in also in issues in New York City. I wanted to say that I have been visiting Ecuador many times in the last, let's say, 5 years, and I have found out that the indigenous people in the Amazon, they have been taking the blood away from them, and someone who suspected, they went and tell them, why you let these people take your blood? And when they become aware that it can be used for some kind of experiment against them, they wanted to ask this to return the blood. And they were told that if they send this blood back, it may be infected and it can wipe out the whole Amazon Indians in the Amazon. I wanted to let also know that in the cities, in the poor countries like South America, they have been withdrawing, the Red Cross is withdrawing blood every day from every single homeless person, free in the hospitals because it's been militarized. It's not free. Nobody can go inside and visit those people. We don't know how many organs are being stolen, how many operations are being done just to steal the organs of these poor Native people, Indians. And I wanted to know that is, some kind of evil governments all over, I mean, not only South America, but in other countries as well. So I wanted to say that this thing has to do with the why nobody is immune. Nobody is going to, like, no blacks, no Indians are going to be saved out of this. We have to try to find, ask the experts, the investigators, who was taking this blood and with what purpose they were taken and how they are being used. So I wanted to say also that no one has been mentioning any of these politicians who are running for Democrats or Republicans, which we repudiate all of them. Nobody has asked why they don't stop the chemtrails. So why they keep infecting people with the chemtrails when so many experts have already exposed that these nanoparticulates have diseases unknown to humans, and this is the first time that's being introduced to humanity. So nobody has touched about this. And I'm happy that at least you are touching something about these issues, because WBAI now is not like before. This should be the voice of the people, and that's it. And all the money that is being given to the radio, it has to be only for these issues, to take care of these issues. And we know that the government has been taking money away from the old people, because this is why this Obama campaign, all these Clintons came to power to kill the old people. This is why they took all the factories from the United States and loaded to China, and now they are jealous with China when they are manufacturing for all of us. So all of these issues must be exposed in many radios, not only one radio. It has to be many radios to have an independent media, not Facebook, not Twitter, but we need an independent who doesn't have the hands of all these corporations. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you for all of that. There's a lot to unpack there, so I'll give I don't even know where to start. First, the congressman from Texas, I think it is, who, and of course the president of the United States, who suggested that that
I have his information right here.
Perhaps there's lives that are warranted to be lost in the battle against the coronavirus if it stimulates the economy. Literally, what's the guy's name again?
I've got it right here. My friend and fellow kinship member just sent me a list. I'll keep them anonymous because I don't have their permission to use their name right now. But they sent me the information, which is that it was Dan Patrick, who's the lieutenant governor of Texas. Okay. He is an evangelical Christian, and he said that elders would happily die for the economy.
Yeah. And that was kind of reiterated a little bit with Donald Trump when he talks about, balancing the destruction of the economy against lives that could or could be saved in terms of coronavirus. And so, the caller is smart and wise to bring this up. This is just an example of the populations that are considered to be among the sacrificial people for the wealthy, and there's no other way to describe it. And I think it is oftentimes people who are marginalized, and in this case, whether it's elderly, oftentimes it becomes exacerbated when you think about which elderly are they affluent elderly or non-affluent elderly. So this is part of the issue. On some of the other things, look, it is right, and it's proper, and it is proper that Native people, indigenous populations, are not just wary, but resistant to anybody who wants to come in and study us or proselytize to us. So, I remember a few years ago there was a guy who was who decided he was going to go to this remote island of indigenous people and be a missionary. And in fact, Shawnee actually yelled at me because I made fun of the guy. But the guy died. I mean, he was killed trying to go to a native population to spread the Bible. And I didn't have much remorse for the guy. But I got to tell you, Native people are justified in pushing back against the imposition of whether it's religion or whether it's medicine. And so when I hear somebody who says they have good intentions in coming into a community because they want to study us or they want to offer us some solution for a problem that we don't think we have, I'm very wary of that. And by no means should people be too willing to give up blood samples, or they're young or they're elderly, to people who from the outside who you don't know and who claim that they're there to help, because that's we've heard that before. So I'll put it that.
I also want to unpack a couple of things here, which is that first, Dan Patrick, who is Lieutenant Governor of Texas, is incredibly wealthy. His annual salary is $2.5 million. And he's known as the Houston King of right-wing talk radio. So this is someone who has benefited from incredibly racist and problematic rhetoric in the past. And also, I want to go back on what was being said and what the caller brought up, which is that elders would happily die for the economy. In indigenous communities, and not just indigenous communities, in a lot of communities of color, our elders are incredibly important and taken care of. And I don't want to participate in elder worship because that can also be problematic. But it is important to note that our older population have knowledge, especially in indigenous communities, related to language and culture it is irreplaceable if they pass. It is they are keepers of culture and knowledge that if they pass, especially through COVID, a very violent death, we are losing so much knowledge and culture and love that we will never be able to replace. So I find it incredibly disgusting to say that if the elderly will die for a capitalistic economy. But I also want to shed light, because our caller is an indigenous from the Amazon, that for the past week, the Ecuadorian Amazon community of Sarayaku, which is an indigenous community, has been not just fighting against consistent over deforestation, but because of this accelerated climate crisis, there has been such extreme flooding that folks have lost entire villages and homes, and so that there are other things happening to indigenous communities that are not just COVID. And so I would advocate for listeners to go and to provide some support, financial support, as well as do some research and learn about what is happening right now to the Ecuadorian indigenous folks of the Amazon.
Yeah, every problem that existed before COVID-19 still exists, and so whether we still have people fighting the pipelines in Wet'suwet'en territory, we still have missing and murdered indigenous women, we still have the assaults on the rainforests in South America. Every problem that existed before still exists, and I know sometimes it's very difficult to carve out the space to continue to talk about these issues, and frankly, it's sometimes important to carve out, to understand that COVID is exacerbating some of those issues as well. So, all right, we may have time for one more caller before we got to go to break.
Yes, one more call, and he's been waiting for a while. Caller, you're on the air with Let's Talk with John and Regan. Tell us your name and where you're calling from.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. Thanks for joining the show.
Thanks. I think I've actually been on, but I've kept quiet while the previous caller. Does that qualify as a rant?
Well, it's hard. I mean, I realize that people sometimes they rarely get the opportunity to speak, so they try to make the most of it. So I appreciate what she had to say. But go ahead.
I think that Indigenous women who come on this radio can take as much space as they want.
Unfortunately, I'm generally cut off when I start to speak for some reason or another. I was just wondering if any of you have been keeping close track of the daily White House coronavirus briefings, and let me put what I'm hearing mildly as mixed messages, okay, and not so mildly as bold-faced lies and shameless self-promotion. Are you seeing it that way, or is it just me?
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, I think the notion that, whether it's the governor of New York or the president of the United States, feels like they've got to reach out on a daily basis to somehow offer, confidence or reassurance to people, would be fine if that's what they were really doing. The problem that I see, especially with Trump, is that it is completely self-serving. There's almost no place in this conversation to use the superlatives that he uses all the time: the greatest, wonderful, tremendous. All of these things. I mean, even as people talk about the stimulus package, he makes it sound like he should win an award for this thing, or So, and you're right. The misinformation. I mean, including this idea that depriving malaria patients of their medicine is somehow and creating the run on those medicines, because anecdotally there's a few people who said they've had some success with this thing. There's no clinical trials that have proven out that that this malaria drug or the Z-Pack has had any benefit or substantial benefit in this thing. Not the game changer or anything that Trump says. So you got to almost parse what Trump says versus what Fauci or the other doctors or experts say, because it is not just confusing. I think it's sometimes confusing on purpose.
I also think that, I know we have to wrap up. I just want to say one thing, which is that he is a distraction. He's always been a distraction, and you don't have to listen to him. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I agree. I thank you for the caller. You do have to balance all the stuff out there, folks, and by no means can you be spoon fed. You have to do some of your own research. So do that. Look, we're going to continue to do this in this way for quite some time, I suspect. I want to give my thanks to Reggie Johnson in particular for holding the fort down there at WBAI. And again, I want to thank you, Regan, for being available. And we'll see you next week right here on Let's Talk.